The incorporeal God needs a body. God created Adam and Eve to assume physical form. Why does God need a form like Adam? All things have a form, but God is an invisible being. God has no form whatsoever. If we conceive of him as large, he is infinitely large, and if we conceive of him as small, he is infinitely small. Although all things of creation manifest with a certain standard form of that being, and although they manifest with a substantial body resembling that being, God cannot rule them directly. Hence, the substantial world of creation needs a substantial being with the character and form of the Master. God should have dominion over the infinite spirit world as well as over all things on earth. To be able to govern the archangel, beings with various forms, and even invisible beings, God needs a central aspect, that is, an external form. This is why God created Adam. 35-156, October 13th, 1970. God's purpose in creating a human being was to have dominion over the incorporeal and corporeal worlds through him. God must form a relationship with a being that has personality. Thus, with the perfection of Adam, God's image, that is his external form, is perfected. When God created Adam, he intended that Adam's shape, looks, character, and other characteristics should resemble his own, as he stood at the centre of the incorporeal world. Without a form, he could not have dominion over the world of form. 35-156, October 13th, 1970. Why did God create Adam and Eve? He did so to have a body. God, as an incorporeal being, cannot love his physical children without becoming a father and mother with a substantial body. God's purpose in creating Adam and Eve was, first, for the incorporeal God to acquire a body through Adam's body. Second, in assuming a substantial form, he would experience a vibrating jolt to his being. Mere words cannot express the feeling. God wanted to feel joy through the stimulation of this impulse. Vertical Father, who occupies the central axis, he seeks to expand on the horizontal plane. 232-210, July 6, 1992. You cannot see God even in the spirit world. God is not visible. Can you see energy? Since God is the original being of energy, he cannot be seen even in the spirit world. He has no body. Hence, in order to guide and govern the physical world, he must assume physical form. What kind of God is he? If, instead of falling, Adam had grown to maturity, flourished on earth, and gone to heaven, he would have become God who still retained the form of Adam. Hence, the invisible God and visible Adam would have become one. Then, Adam's laughter would have been God's laughter, and the laughter of the universe. 105-193, 1979.10.21. 105-193, October 21st, 1979. As an invisible deity, God cannot feel any stimulation from this universe. No matter how great a stimulus comes to his mind, as an incorporeal being, he will not feel inspiration. As these invisible aspects are the same, they cannot stimulate each other. When two conflicting things like hot water and cold water come together, there is a reaction, isn't there? God needs that kind of stimulation. 141-37, February 16th, 1986. God is invisible even in the spirit world. He has no form. Thus, in order to become the corporeal parent of humankind, God has to acquire a form. Without form, he cannot become the centre. 222-237, November 7th, 1991. God's final purpose of creation is to acquire a body. Since the incorporeal God cannot govern the physical world, he must appear with a body as the father and mother of all humankind. He must assume a physical form in order to relate to created beings as subject partner and object partner, and thus feel stimulation through his sensory organs. 25-342, October 12th, 1969. As a being without form, God cannot rule over the physical world although he created it. He therefore needs a body. God's purpose of creation is to acquire a body and become a substantial parent. That was to be Adam and Eve. Had Adam and Eve reached perfection, God would have entered their minds and created a God-centered kingship. With the establishment of this kingship, the original Adam would have established the right of the parent, and along with that, the right of the eldest son. We would not have needed today's realm of the second son. Adam himself would be the eldest of the elder sons. Likewise, Eve would also be the eldest of the elder daughters. This way, the two children would have become the parents of all human parents, and at the same time, monarchs of the eternal world. 214-39, February 1st, 1991. Why did God give human beings a body? Why did he not just remain alone, without a body? Would that not have been much better? Why did God create the body, which has caused so many problems? God is a deity without form. Such a God cannot be the ancestor of human beings who have a body. He has to assume a physical form, because he wants to relate to his children who have bodies. This is why Adam's body becomes like God's body. And so, God is elevated to an even higher stage, a world of a higher dimension than that of Adam's mind. 223-183, 11th of October, 1991. Since God is invisible and has no form, he must manifest himself by taking on a form. To rule over humankind and all things which do have form, God must take on the form of Adam and Eve. Then, once Adam and Eve and God become one, God's heart becomes the heart of Adam and Eve. You must realize that when God would enter into Adam and Eve's heart and become one with them, he would, ultimately, be like Adam's internal master, or the internal Adam. 90-149, January 1st, 1977. Why did God create human beings? As this universe has physical form, God did so in order to manage and lead it through Adam and Eve, who would be the masters with bodily form. Since God is without form in the spirit world and cannot rule directly over the universe, he created humankind in order to assume physical form and become the king who can rule over his descendants, his children who are born in the world. The face of this king was to be Adam's face. A king needs a queen. Who is the queen? Eve was to become the queen. Adam and Eve were to be the ancestors in the heavenly world as well as on earth. 199-144, February 16th, 1990. Adam is the first ancestor and visible God. God created Adam and Eve, first in order to have a body, and second in order to perfect love. Had Adam and Eve reached maturity and become a physical incarnation of love by becoming one, God would have come into them. He would then have been the loving parent of humankind. The ideal world would have been realized when Adam and Eve, as parents in God's external form, multiplied children. Then, the spiritual world and physical world would be connected through human beings. Thus, God also created human beings for the purpose of connecting the spiritual world with the physical world. In this way, God would dwell in Adam and Eve through love as the true parent of humankind, the parent incarnate. He would also appear as the parent in the form of Adam and Eve after Adam and Eve went to the spirit world. Blessed Family 307. Adam, created as God's body, would become the true ancestor of humankind. Adam, in other words, would be God incarnate. For the incorporeal God to have dominion over the world of physical beings, to be able to see and hear in that tangible world, he needs a tangible body. The one created to be God incarnate was Adam. Then who is Eve? Eve was Adam's wife, a wife with physical form. If Adam were God incarnate, Eve would be God's wife incarnate. Saying that the holy God would take a wife may sound shocking, but Adam was created as God's body, and he was to take Eve as his wife. Eve, then, would have been God's wife incarnate. 22-279, May 4th, 1969. God needed Adam and Eve for two purposes. First, it was to enable the incorporeal God to appear in an external form. Second, he wanted to fulfill the ideal of love. Adam and Eve were to be the basis and essence of the incorporeal God's capacity to relate to the corporeal world with its visible external form. 92-147, April 1st, 1977. What good would come from the incorporeal God staying alone in heaven? An invisible God has no use. To be the parent of humankind, he has to be able to feel with a body. You must understand that God inevitably had to create Adam and Eve as beings embodying his duality. He had to have a body in human form. 133-91, July 10th, 1984. When God becomes a father with bodily form, the invisible and visible become one. This symbolizes the universe becoming one. For this to happen, God created Adam and Eve with a bodily form resembling God's external form. Adam and Eve would then be elevated to the heavenly palace and heavenly throne, where God would dwell in their hearts as the king and queen, to rule over the earthly and incorporeal worlds. In other words, God's kingdom is established. This kingdom is the kingdom of love. The spirit and body can unite only through love and through nothing else. 143-93, March 16, 1986. Eve was born as a princess and also as God's future object partner. God wanted to make her his partner in love, that is, his wife. Why is this? To share love, God needs a body. God has no form in the spirit world. He appears as light, like the light of the sun that shines in the atmosphere 24 hours a day. God, as an incorporeal being, manages everything from above. But he would feel a great emptiness if, when looking down on human beings from on high, he was always reminded of the gap, of the impossibility of his incorporeal self having them, with their bodies, as his love partner. For this reason, the incorporeal God created Adam and Eve with bodies as an absolute work of the ideal of love, and as his partners. Whose form does God take? God assumes the form of Adam and Eve. God is the internal father, and Adam the external father. God is the internal parent, and Adam and Eve are the external parents. 199-361, February 21st, 1990. God created heaven and earth in order to share love. Thus, the incorporeal God brings a man and a woman out onto the stage as incarnations of his eternal love. Those he brings forward as the central incarnations of love are humankind's true ancestors and the true parents of goodness. You have not had true parents, but today the Unification Church has the doctrine of the true parents. 38-173, March 1st, 1971. Why did God create Adam and Eve? The incorporeal God cannot have dominion over this substantial world. The formless, invisible deity cannot rule over the visible world of created beings, the universe. For this reason, God must acquire a body based on love. This is why he created. When he takes on a body centered on love, he can feel internal and external stimulation. Stimulation occurs. 166-232, June 7, 1987. Since the invisible God has no bodily form, the true parents represent his form. The true parents are parents on the level of the individual, family, tribe, people, and nation. In the future, God will appear in the form of the true parents in the spirit world. 98-224, August 1st, 1978. This teaching marks the greatness of the Unification Church. The greatness of Reverend Moon is that God wants to assume his form. 166-232, June 7th, 1987. God is without form. The incorporeal God has now appeared as a God with form. What is this corporeal God? It is what we call the true parents who have not fallen. 201-83, March 4th, 1990. Ultimately, since God is spiritual and without form, people can neither directly receive what he teaches nor receive the experience of rebirth from God. Hence, God established central figures so that people can be taught and experience rebirth through them. They are the corporeal and incorporeal true parents. 91 to 101, February 3rd, 1977. What was God's purpose in creating Adam and Eve? As human beings, we have a body, but the invisible God does not. Without a body, God cannot govern the spiritual and physical worlds. Hence, although God exists, if he wants to manifest as the parent of humankind, he must acquire a body. God's representatives who had that body were to be Adam and Eve. God was to appear by assuming the form of unfallen Adam and Eve. Therefore, while Adam and Eve are the first ancestors of humankind, they were also supposed to be God, who rules over heaven and earth. Adam and Eve were to be God in bodily form. That is, they had the responsibility to govern the world in the position of parents, assuming the external form of God who dwells in the eternal visible world. 133-91, July 10th, 1984. God's aim was not only for God and human beings to perfect a vertical love relationship as subject and object partners. He also sought on the basis of the perfection of their vertical love to bring the horizontal love of Adam and Eve to fruition. When God comes as the internal parent and Adam and Eve, as the external parents, achieve complete oneness with him, in that moment, the ideal of love is realized. As the invisible parent, God becomes the eternal parent in the visible world by taking on the form of Adam and Eve. At this point, Adam and Eve would become the true parents and true ancestors. 135-10, August 20th, 1985.